Cool. I'm recording now. Your background looks a lot more fun than mine does.
Mine's real. Anything could happen behind me at any moment. So.
Let's hope it stays calm down there. So we got like 10 to 15 minutes, right? Is what I've told.
Okay. Yeah, whatever you need.
Cool. So I want to start off with some UAP news, and then we'll move on to Russia. But I would like to begin with the whistleblower story, David Grush, whom I know you are familiar with. I'm just wondering generally, yes or no, you find his allegations that he has made credible?
Well, I think more importantly, the Inspector General has referred it to Congress. We have a law for whistleblowers. So they go to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, and then they have an obligation. If they find it to be an urgent concern, credible and urgent concern, their job is to refer it to Congress, and they have done so. So obviously, there isn't anything formal we need to do, although I know we have spoken to him and are familiar with much of his testimony, which, of course, we're not at this moment because it's a whistleblower investigation. We really can't talk about it in detail, although he has talked about it in quite detail. And the gist of any whistleblower testimony is that the intelligence agencies are doing something wrong. And in his case, and this has been publicly reported, the argument is that what they're doing wrong is they are not appropriately disclosing to Congress money that has been spent on programs and the like. Now, I want to caution everybody that under the law, you have to have firsthand knowledge. That doesn't mean the person isn't telling the truth, but it simply means that technically, as a technicality, if you don't have firsthand knowledge of what you are claiming, so I can say that someone told me that someone did something wrong, and I have good reason to believe it because I heard it from a lot of different people and they all are saying the same thing. But unless you yourself have firsthand knowledge of it, sometimes you get caught in the technicality. That doesn't mean that the things he is saying are not useful to Congress. And I would put it to people this way. There are one or two things here are true. Either what he is saying is partially true or entirely true, or we have some really smart, educated people with high clearances and very important positions in our government who are crazy and are leading us on a goose chase. One of these two things is true. Either what they're telling us is true, or we've got some people in important positions that are doing this for some reason. So either one is a problem. We got to figure this out. We can't ignore it.
Well, the reason his story is getting so much attention is because the nature of his allegations are that the government maintains we have a UAP retrieval program that in its possession has multiple aircraft that are not made by humans. I mean, what are we to make of that, the public that has to hear that?
Well, two things. Either it's not true, and I'm not claiming it is, and I'm not besmirching him or anybody else because we passed a law to make it possible for people like this to come forward. Remember, a lot of these people sign these non-disclosure agreements, and they're fearful of ever, commenting because they think it's punishable by death. So we passed a law that basically said you can come forward and talk to Congress or the UAP task force. So I don't want to say that anybody's not telling the truth. I understand that this is something that sounds fantastic and out of the ordinary. I would just say if it's even partially true, then somebody's broken the law. There's been some violations because these things have to be disclosed to Congress. I mean, Congress has been paying for it and probably for a long time. I am not in a position to tell you right now whether it's true or not true. What I am in a position to tell you is that people, and I think this is true not just in this case, but going back to some of the things we've heard from Navy pilots, people who we entrusted to do some really important things for our country are saying some pretty incredible things that I think we have an obligation to take seriously and listen to. Because, I don't think you go from being the commander of a naval fighting wing off an aircraft carrier to being some lunatic that's out to mislead the government. And there you have, testimony from Navy pilots, things they've seen. So that's why this is something, my biggest fear in all this, frankly, and I'm not, ruling anything out, obviously, but my biggest fear is that some adversary has made a technological leap. That would be really bad news. And that we have been caught, flat-footed on it. So we're taking it seriously. It's bipartisan. Everyone's working on it. But look, this is a tough thing to dig into. There's a stigma associated with it, right? I mean, nobody wants to be known as the UFO guy, but these are things that are important for us to understand.
I feel that sometimes when I ask you these questions. So
I get it. No, look, but I mean, stuff is flying. What is undisputed is that there are things flying over restricted airspace, sensitive restricted airspace in the United States, and they claim it's not ours. That alone is reason to be looking at this stuff.
Yeah. He also claims that Arrow is not being read in, that whatever this program is, allegedly, is keeping the people who are supposed to be dealing with it in the dark. It's not just about funding, it's about disclosure to Arrow as well. Do you think that's realistic, or how problematic is that if that's accurate?
Well, it's very problematic if it's accurate, because if that is accurate, and again, I'm not in a position yet to make that judgment, but if that is accurate, what you're basically saying is that within the government of the United States, there's a group of people who believe that they possess something that they don't need to share with anybody, including elected officials who they view as temporary employees of the government, and in essence, some sort of an internal military complex that's their own government and is accountable to no one. So it would be a huge problem if it's even partially true. So look, I think Arrow and its director, Dr. Kirkpatrick, from everything I've seen up to this point, is trying to do the best they can to gather a lot of information. We gave them a mandate to go back to the historical records on this. We will know, I think, in time, and I mean not 20 years from now, but over the next couple of years, whether in fact enough information is being shared and whether the analysis is being done and whether there's any impediments. But I certainly think we are getting more information now, more people coming forward than at any time in the history of our country about this.
Yeah.
And somewhere out there, I think we need to find answers, because at the end of the day, these are activities should never be unsupervised. Anytime agencies of the federal government are unsupervised and do whatever they want, it's generally not a good outcome for the country.
I'm wondering how much interaction you've had on Senate Intel with David Grush himself, and potentially how much interaction you all have had with the people who do have firsthand knowledge. Have you talked to anybody who he says, these are my sources, these are the guys that have actually seen firsthand aircraft? Have you talked to anybody?
Well, and I'm not sure he's disclosed these individuals, at least not to us. And so, again, because it's a whistleblower process, not just him, but others, I will say there are people that have come forward to share information with our committee over the last couple of years. I would imagine some of them are potentially some of the same people that perhaps he's referring to. I want to be very protective of these people. A lot of these people came to us even before these protections were in the law for whistleblowers to come forward. And a lot of them come.
Sorry, people who have had firsthand knowledge, who claim to have firsthand knowledge of seeing this type of thing?
That's or have firsthand knowledge or firsthand claims of certain things. Some are public figures, and you've heard from them in the past. Others, have not shared publicly. And so we're trying to gather as much of that information as we can. And the reason why I'm being cautious, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I am trying to be protective of these people. Some of these people still work in the government. And frankly, a lot of them are very fearful of their jobs, fearful of their clearances, fearful of their career. And some, frankly, are fearful of harm coming to them. And so I want to be very sort of, respectful of that, because I don't want to discourage others from coming forward.
Right. And I totally understand. I will never ask you to reveal a source to us, but I'm just wondering, just so I can 100% clarify, you are saying that the people who would be whistleblowers because they would have firsthand knowledge of seeing these kind of aircraft, or they claim that they have seen. Those are the category of people you've heard from.
We've heard from people that are both in the service of our government and some who used to serve in the past, and some of whom are publicly out there saying these things, sort of saying to us what you've seen out there in the public record, whether it's about legacy programs or about current events and things that are going on at this moment. Again, we are trying, all of them have, in many cases, understandings of different elements of this firsthand. They may have heard some of the other pieces. And so I think for us, it's really important to sort of just gather information and understand this. But I think the more we know, the better we are prepared to go down the right roads or in the right paths or ask the right questions. But we're still sort of in that phase where this is new to a lot of people. And there's still a lot of people that I think are starting to edge towards coming forward. And we hear maybe coming forward, but are still trying to see how it plays out for the people that came forward first.
Okay. So that category of people who have firsthand knowledge, who say they have actually seen these kinds of things, do you find many of them credible?
Well, I don't find them either not credible or credible, because we have no basis. Understand some of these claims are things that are beyond sort of the realm of what any of us has ever dealt with. What I think we owe them is just a mature, understand, listening and trying to put all these pieces together and just sort of intake the information without any prejudgment or jumping to any conclusions in one direction or another. I will say I find most of these people at some point, or maybe even currently, have held very high clearances and high positions within our government. So you do ask yourself, like, what incentive would so many people with that kind of qualification, these are serious people, have to come forward and make something up? And on the other hand, like I said, I mean, extraordinary claims, is something that requires a lot of work and to back up. So I don't know the answer to it. I think when you're in a fact-finding mission, you're trying not to prejudge anything. You're trying to take in information, and you're trying not to rule anything out or jump to any conclusions because, this is new to everybody, frankly. I mean, this is not what I thought I would be focused on when I ran for the U.S. Senate, but here it is. And I think, a serious issue.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this topic just with one more question, and that is that you have co-sponsored an amendment to the Intel Authorization Act, where you said within 6 months, you want a comprehensive list of all non-Earth origin or exotic unidentified anomalous phenomena material to make that available to AARO within 6 months. Can you tell me about that amendment and just the need to bring it up?
Well, yeah, and I mean, and Senator Gillibrand deserves a lot of credit. She's sort of been the one that's pursuing that, and we want to be supportive of it. And I think the gist of it is, if in fact these claims that are out there are true, that information needs to be provided to the task force that we set up to both protect whatever national security equities are in place and at the same time gain access to all of this. Now, if the answer that comes back is no such material exists, then obviously that goes par for the course because you've already seen some of the public statements. But when it's that to that effect, but I think when it's in the law, career people that are in the service of our government have to make a decision. Do I just basically ignore the law and the consequences that come with it? No one's ever asked these questions before. This has always been the realm of science fiction. So I think we're simply responding to some of the things that we've seen come out in the public record. And ensuring that we're doing everything we can to make sure that this entity we've created called AARO actually has access to information or materials if in fact they exist. Again, I can't tell you that they do or they don't. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet. And that's probably the gist of all this is we're trying to find out the answer.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so on Russia, I want to ask, as someone who has access to, I imagine, much more intel than the rest of us do, what do you make of what you saw this weekend? And do you think that this is the sort of beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin's reign?
Well, I would not jump to any conclusion. I think there's a lot we're never going to know about this. Or there's a lot we don't know about this. So, but I will say this: Prigozhin and Wagner have been a very valuable group working on behalf of Putin all over the world. It's populated by former soldiers, but also by a bunch of convicted felons. I mean, murderers they've released from jail. It's a brutal group. It's a criminal group. In fact, Prigozhin himself is indicted and wanted here in the United States. And I think what's happened here is they've had success in Ukraine. They've actually outperformed the regular military. And Prigozhin, who also runs the Internet Research Agency and is a pretty good online troll, has been putting out all these videos embarrassing the military and making his guys look good. And so there's a huge rub going on between him and Gerasimov, who runs the army, and Shoigu, who runs the Ministry of Defense. I think Prigozhin concluded, these guys are coming after us. They're coming after me. I'm going to hit them before they hit me. So he goes into that city, tries to capture them. They flee, but he captures their headquarters. And then he marches to the outskirts of Moscow. I think he concluded at that point, I've embarrassed them enough. I've shown Putin what I've been saying all along, that these guys are corrupt and inept, which is why, Russia's failing in Ukraine. And then this guy from Belarus, their fake president, comes in with some sort of offer. We don't know what the offer was or what the off ramp or what the promises are. And then Putin comes out tonight and basically says, well, you're still going to, basically he came out tonight and said, whatever promises that guy made you, we're not going to keep them. You're still going to face justice. We're going to get our hands on you. So I think that's where it stands. What happens next? We just don't know. Nobody can tell you that.
What do we know about just the Wagner group and about Prigozhin, where he is, what his fate may be? Do we have any insight into that?
I don't have any insight I can share on where he is, and I'm sure Putin wants to know the answer to that too, based on his statements tonight. But Wagner Group is a private military contractor. Think about Blackwater and the role they played in the U.S. Except these guys are populated not just with former military, but with some really bad guys. I mean, these are terrible people. I mean, there's videos of them out there executing enemies with sledgehammers. So in fact, the sledgehammer is one of their symbols. They've literally beat people to death with sledgehammers. So these are not good guys. And I think this was being misinterpreted as some sort of a political coup. Maybe he wanted Putin to flee or whatever. But this is really a coup of the Ministry of Defense. This is a private beef between this guy who's a gangster and the gangsters that run the Ministry of Defense. And he made a move on them before they made a move on him, because Putin wouldn't fire him. So he was going to embarrass them to force Putin to fire him. And now he may be the guy that gets, that falls out of a window or drinks the poison tea or something else happen. We don't know what happens next. But let me say this. that group of people he has working with him, they're not just going to break away. Those people never wanted to be a part of the Russian military. They eat better, they're paid better, they're trained better, they have better equipment than the Russian military does. These guys aren't just going to break from this guy and go join the Russian military. So there's a lot yet to happen here that we don't know what comes next. We just don't. It's very impressive.
Interesting. And I wonder if just this whole example has prompted people to think about whether the NSC, whether the Pentagon, DOD, or State Department, whether they have a strategy in place for if and when Putin is replaced and someone else steps in. What does that look like diplomatically for the United States?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because Russia doesn't have a neat succession plan. There isn't a logical second, place person in case Putin were to die tonight or something or whatever, or were to decide to retire and go play golf. There's no one that knows who comes next. It isn't like the old Soviet Union that had the Communist Party in place. This Putinism may not have really a logical successor. I think for us, the number one concern is always going to be command and control of their nuclear arsenal, which is pretty vast. And it looks a lot like ours. It's pretty complex. You can't just push a button and launch a bunch of missiles. But that's the first thing that always would cross our mind, right? Is where are these things secure? And is there a chain of command in place that's secure no matter what happens? Beyond that, I think this is an internal Russian matter that, we really don't have a lot of control over.
And just my last one is this. If Putin is replaced, if this is potentially the beginning of the end, does that automatically mean that the war in Ukraine is going to come to a gradual end, or could whoever replaces him continue this effort?
Well, I think one of the things we really looked at this weekend is how would Russian troops on the field react in Ukraine? The bad blood doesn't just exist between Wagner and military heads that are hiding in the headquarters somewhere far from the battlefield. But I think the ground guys, especially the ground commanders and the leadership of the MOD, don't have a great relationship either. So one of the things we watched for very closely and continue to watch for is what effect does that have on those frontline troops who ask themselves, well, who's in charge here? Who are we fighting on behalf of? This is not a popular war among soldiers on the front line there, a lot of whom, frankly, were conscripted or forced into this fight and don't see the value of it. It's not like they were invaded. So I think that's another element that's not known about. But it's interesting when Prigozhin in the days leading up to this was putting out videos basically criticizing the war in Ukraine and arguing that this was all done just to enrich the guys that he ultimately made a move on. Now, whether that's a pretext he was creating to make his move, or whether that's how he honestly believes, I don't know. But, he wouldn't be a good guy either. He'd just be a different criminal in charge of that country. So we shouldn't lionize him either as some sort of a great heroic figure. We're not talking about Gandhi or Gorbachev here. I mean, this is not a good guy. So, but we'll look at this is an internal Russian matter. I mean, there's not much we can do except watch and always act in our national interest.
All right. Senator Rubio, thank you. Anything else you want to add before we let you go?
No, thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
All right, you too.